the Bogosity podcast for the 4th of August, 2014. The podcast that's in pieces, bits and pieces. This is your host, Shane Killian, and join me again this week are Jonathan Loesche and Dave Turcotte. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be back.
What's up?
First, a quick correction. 2 podcasts ago, we were looking at Mike Dawson's drawing of a rifle and wondering what it was supposed to be. Because it wasn't a modern deer rifle or anything like that. We were wondering maybe it was in a musket or whatever. Well, El Guicho on YouTube recognized it. He said it was a pretty good representation of a Henry repeating rifle, which was one of the first practical functioning repeating rifles. It was actually used in the Civil War. It was a .44 caliber rifle capable of firing 28 rounds a minute. Magazine started at 16 rounds. The saying was that you could load it on Sunday and shoot it all week. Bullets were 216 grains fired by 28 grains of powder. By comparison, an AR-15 generally uses 23 grains of powder to fire a 55-grain bullet. So this rifle is much more powerful than these so-called assault weapons, and even more dangerous than a lot of proper assault rifles. And it also had no safety and was always in the firing position. So I really doubt this is what he had in mind when he drew it as an example of what he wants the Second Amendment to cover.
Ban it! Gotta be banned.
All right, well, let's flash mob the news of the bogus. And we're going to start off with one of those well-duh stories. This is about a study, and it's actually 2 studies, but a review of both of them, in the journal Cognitive Science, which found that children with a religious background were less likely to tell fact from fiction than children with a non-religious background. Shocker, I know.
Yeah.
Because it looked like the age groups was to 5 and 6.
Yeah, 5 and 6-year-olds. They didn't do anything like showing how this follows them into adulthood, which I think would be interesting to find out.
Yeah, because I know, I had sort of a pretty sheltered, especially in my early childhood. I didn't really interact with a lot of kids my age. And I was in a very non-religious household, and I still had some issues with telling the difference between fantasy and reality.
Well, it's like when my daughter was 5 or 6, she had no trouble telling whether something was real or not. And now that she's 12, she seems to actually have a bit more problems like that. And I think she's probably just at that stage where she wants magic to be real and things like that. So, I don't know, but it'd be interesting. I don't know how much of a predictor this is of what it's like when you grow up.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not quite sure if this is, I'm sure religion is a factor, but I'm not sure if this is a definitive, we can pin this as the primary reason or not. I think it's a very interesting field of study that surely warrants more stuff, but I'm not quite sure if we can pin this one on as another issue to have with religion.
Yeah. And let's face it, critical thinking is a skill that has to be taught and practiced.
And sadly, they don't even do enough of that. Just look at the average voter.
Oh, yeah. Well, what they did was they told them stories, and they claimed the protagonist was a real person. All of the children believed the story when it included ordinary realistic events, but as soon as they told them stories with something impossible in them like magic, religious children were much more ready to believe them than non-religious children. And what's interesting was that it didn't just happen when religion played to it in some way. It also held when they told them fantastic stories that had no religious content. So it wasn't just like they were believing the religion they were taught. It opened them up to believing all sorts of nonsense. Even when there wasn't anything religion in the story, children even used parts of their religion to justify why they thought the story was true.
Well, that's oddly specific.
I mean, if you tell your average 5 or 6-year-old the story of Santa Claus delivering presents around the world...
Now, that's true. Because if they're also told about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and stuff like that, that might have an effect as well.
Yeah, it seems like there are other factors that have to be put into it, like it was the child sheltered. What kind of material did the child have, like in terms of what did it enjoy? Did it enjoy more fantasy-based television shows and books and all that kind of stuff? I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot more to be said than just, oh, pinpoint it at this must be it, that's it.
But, I mean, I think it is a lesson for all of us because we've seen it all the time. Someone gives up one form of woo, like Christianity, Doesn't necessarily mean they're giving up on others. I mean, Bill Maher does a very good job of arguing for atheism and against Christianity, but then he's fallen for all this anti-vaccination nonsense.
And denial of germ theory.
Damn it, it's because of fast food. Fast food causes disease, Dave. Don't you understand?
Oh, yeah, and so does GMOs, too, because apparently the fact that we didn't want GMOs forced labeled, that means we want to eat mutants.
Hey, didn't you know disease didn't exist prior to 1990?
But I mean, that's the thing. They're not striking the root. They've only pruned that one particular branch, and then maybe they pruned 2 or 3 other branches, but then they still cling on to the political bogosity, or they fall for other bogosity like anti-vaccination or the moon hoax or whatever. Even though they've already shrugged off the religion, the type of lousy thinking that might have led them to adhere to the religion might also explain why they adhered to those other things. And it would certainly explain why, once again, we see the same sort of logical fallacies being employed with all these different forms of woo.
Oh, yeah.
History is written by the winners, and so apparently is economics. That's why there's LibertyClassroom.com. Probably the best single learning resource for history and economics on the web, LibertyClassroom.com teaches U.S. history, Western Civ, and economics from actual university professors. There's lots of free material to get you started, including introductory lectures on all these subjects, and when you sign up, you get the full site's content for just $99 a year, less than the price of 2 cups of coffee a month. And if you type in the promo code Bogosity in all caps, you'll get your first year for just $88. Lectures are available in both video and audio format, so you can watch or listen to them on your computer, your phone or tablet, or in your car. Learn at your own pace about the subjects you're interested in and become a more effective debater. You'll also get access to lots of supplemental materials and even the professors themselves via the discussion forum and even live video chats. Inform yourself against the myths and propaganda of our society. Visit LibertyClassroom.com. And now some good news from the WHO. I mean, they still do crap like claim that cell phones cause brain cancer, but at least they've seen some degree of sense when it comes to drug prohibition. They have called for full decriminalization and broad drug policy reforms. They also preferred treatment as an option for drug users rather than prison time, but wouldn't compel it.
Oh, good. Again, though, it's stuff we've been saying for years.
Yeah, they finally caught up to where we were 40 years ago.
Well, wouldn't you know it?
But how are we going to justify giving police departments tanks?
We're not. Not much more you could say than that. We're not.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Without, well, they could probably still do like a terrorism thing because that's still the boogeyman. And they've had a lot more success with that boogeyman than they have with the war on drugs because the Patriot Act was basically a whole big laundry list of stuff they'd been trying to get passed for like 10 years or more, trying to get that passed in the name of fighting the war on drugs. They couldn't get it past the people, but then 9/11 happened, and lo and behold, they get it passed, like a month later or that same month, I think.
Well, what they could always do is follow economic woo Paul Krugman and just fake an alien invasion.
That's true. Although I think you need the actual destruction with that.
Do you think that would stop them?
Who knows? We could try it.
That would only get them more excited.
We need to fight the alien menace. Well, the report recommended, 1. Countries should work toward developing policies and laws that decriminalize injection and other use of drugs and thereby reduce incarceration. 2. Countries should work toward developing policies and laws that decriminalize the use of clean needles and syringes and that permit NSPs, that's needle and syringe programs, and that legalize OST, opioid substitution therapy, for people who are opioid dependent. 3. Countries should ban compulsory treatment for people who use and or inject drugs. Hey, how about 4, countries should realize that our bodies are our own business and nobody, least of all government, has any business telling us what we can and can't put into it. I guess that was a little too much to hope for.
That wouldn't be a 4, that would be 1, and that would be the only one.
True. What else do you need after that?
Just a good place to call.
According to Ethan Nadelman, executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, quote, "It's good to see the WHO come out so strongly for decriminalizing drugs and rejecting compulsory treatment for people who use drugs. Its recommendations, grounded as they are in science and public health, drive home the need for fundamental reforms in U.S. drug policies, in particular the growing reliance on drug courts to treat people arrested for drug possession.
Now, I'm sure somebody's going to complain about this, though, because, hey, if you get rid of our drug laws, how are we going to blame black people for things?
I don't know. It's probably more likely that this will go the way of all the other reports, from bodies like this that have come out. It just kind of gets shelved and ignored.
Well, that's like a story we covered, I think it was either last year or a couple years ago, about the UN actually showing evidence that wealth creation works better than wealth redistribution when it comes to poverty.
Yep.
You spread that one around like the plague, and people just, casually ignore it.
Yeah.
Even the UN.
Well, if it goes against your agenda, then it has to be ignored. Because who cares about reality?
Exactly.
Bogosity.tv is a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for sites to earn advertising fees by advertising and linking to Amazon.com. Just clear your cookies and go to Amazon.bogosity.tv, or check the right-hand side of the podcast page for Amazon's best deals, including the deal of the day and limited-time lightning deals on all sorts of great products. So next time you buy online, go to Amazon.bogosity.tv. Okay, so we've been covering Lyft and Uber and other ride-sharing services. And we've also talked about how politicians and their unthinking followers really don't like it because it actually competes with taxi cabs. Well, now, New York City has just gotten completely paranoid about the whole thing. Case in point, Kirill Akins picked up his wife, Natalie, from a friend's house one evening back in January, and he was pulled over by a car flashing its lights. The agent in the car wasn't a policeman. He was with the Taxi and Limousine Commission, or, get this, TLC. Oh, they're the TLC. What do you think about that?
Oh, there's certainly nothing we're learning from them.
Or getting +8 from.
I was thinking, tender loving care. That's what they used to say. I guess that might be before you guys' time or something. Old fart showing his age again. Never mind. So yeah, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, those brave and noble warriors of truth and justice who keep New York City streets safe from people who give rides to other people without a license.
I almost wonder if they were thinking in terms of a stereotype here.
What do you mean?
Come on. Kirill Akins? The stereotype of cabs in New York being like Indians or Muslim?
I don't know, but we'll see more on the racial issue here in a minute, but... Yeah, what happened was they suspected Akins of operating an illegal ride-sharing service. Natalie tried to tell them she was his wife, even gave them her address and social security number, wouldn't even listen to her. They seized his car, and the couple had to walk home on a cold night for an hour and a half. Oh, and by the way, Natalie was pregnant at the time.
Folks, unions are mobs at this point. You don't even hide it anymore. Stuff like this, it's mob work.
Is that even a union? I thought this was a government agency.
Well, it's at the behest of the taxi unions.
Okay.
They're doing this for the sake of their union cronies.
It's official. We need to start referring to this as the People's Republic of New York City.
Yeah, that or the Mob's Republic of New York City. This is just downright mafia work.
Oh, yeah.
That's not even a joke or an exaggeration. This is the kind of stuff that the mob would do. The only difference is they didn't kill them.
Well, because they didn't resist.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this is done by anything else, this would be robbery and extortion.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is the stuff you'd see Tony Soprano doing. They're on our turf.
It's bad enough that they would do it to anybody at all, but the fact that they did it to a pregnant woman, just... How low can you go?
Well, let's see, when they're apparently worth at least $600 a pop.
I have $1,200 for each infraction. That's what I saw in the story.
The seizures are a revenue producer for the city. Accused drivers or the owners of alleged illegal cab must pay a fine of at least $600 and hundreds of dollars more for the cost of towing an impound. Okay.
But this is not an isolated incident. Other people accused of driving illegal taxis have been a black man driving his wife to work, a Turkish man who was driving with some white friends, an Asian man driving his white employer. Are you noticing the trend here? And there was also a livery driver who was stopped and had his car seized 6 times, even though each and every time a judge threw it out saying he didn't do anything wrong. There was also a man dropping off his girlfriend at work and a dad taking his teenage daughter to school.
Again, the mafia.
Yeah. In fact, in the past year and a half, over 7,000 cases have been brought up accusing a driver of operating an illegal taxi. Over 1,400 of them were dismissed, but in each case, it took weeks. The driver had to do without a car in the interim, unless they could afford the $2,000 bond to get it out early. One man, 65-year-old John Brunson, said that even though he won his case, he still had to pay $1,200 on a rental car, a lawyer, and towing fees. So even if you win, you still have to pay the towing fees.
Ridiculous.
As for the Aikens, the judge threw out their case, and it's not hard to see why. Not only did they have ample evidence they were married, the TLC inspector was so confused, he initially said it was a man that Aikens had picked up, and at one point he claimed there was a second passenger, which there never was.
Yeah, that's not confusion. That's making stuff up to not make you seem like the bad guy. There was no confusion there.
And again, not isolated. There were hundreds of inspectors who changed their testimony during their hearings. They failed to recall important details. They couldn't make a legal justification for the stop. More than one was caught lying outright. And that includes claiming that the passenger paid them for the ride when they absolutely did not. But note that even though each of these cases got dismissed, the onus was on the driver to prove he did nothing wrong. Guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, again, mafia. I'm going to keep saying it. It's a broken record, but it's a point that needs to keep being said because it's true. Only in the mafia are you guilty before proven innocent, and apparently now it applies to the government.
And pretty soon, competing with taxi services will mean owning or operating any kind of motor vehicle whatsoever. Oh, you drove yourself? You took a ride away from one of those cabbies and he lost money.
Yeah, and then pretty soon it'll be having legs.
Yeah.
Oh, you walked? Oh, well, you just took away from the cab drivers.
What was that Beatles song? If you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the tax man.
Yeah. Well, TLC spokesstooge Alan Fromberg defended the agency, quote, "It's true that there are occasions where a situation is not always as it might appear to an inspector. That's precisely why they do not adjudicate these matters in the field. That's a job for the administrative law judges, where respondents have the option to be represented by attorneys and present evidence and/or witnesses. The fact that there are a certain number of cases that are dismissed means that the system works for everyone." No, it doesn't! I mean, these people had to go cars without for weeks. They had to pay for attorney, get a rental car. This is not a system that works.
I would have said something, but...
Eat a and die, you son of a... Sorry. Sorry, the anger just was starting to boil over.
Yeah. Pressure release valve, it's important. And that's not even to mention the fact that there's absolutely no rational justification for any of this to begin with.
Well, there is, depending on who you ask. The rational justification being, it's ours, go screw yourself.
And how is that rational?
Well, not to normal people. It's rational if you're trying to scam others into making money.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because statists often like to make fun of libertarians, saying that our philosophy is screw you, got mine.
Yep.
This is exactly what the Cabbies are doing.
Yeah, no question. No question at all.
And to quote the Beatles once again, with a little help from their friends.
Yeah. And guns.
And friends with guns.
Pleased to meet you, can't you guess my name?
That's not the Beatles, though. That's Rolling Stones.
Well, what the hell? Let's just quote everybody.
You say you don't like Bitcoin? Why not? Oh, because it's not gold. No problem. Just go to coins.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to Coinable, where you can buy gold or silver coins or bars with your Bitcoins, with literally up-to-the-minute spot pricing. Now there's no reason not to jump on the Bitcoin bandwagon. Whether you're a Bitcoin miner, service operator, Bitcoin business owner, or market speculator, you can get gold and silver from reputable dealers, and Coinable has Bitcoin liquidity for fast processing of your order. Coinable even utilizes a special shipping infrastructure to ensure that your investment arrives safely at your door. And you know what? By going to coins.bogosity.tv, you won't pay a penny more, a Satoshi more for your purchase. But you'll help this podcast. You can even sell your gold and silver for Bitcoin as well. Coinable is your Bitcoin to gold marketplace. So go to coins.bogosity.tv and start turning your Bitcoins into gold now. Well, geez, after that, who could possibly be this week's biggest Bogon emitter? Well, this probably won't come as a surprise to many of their customers, but it's Verizon.
We were quoting all these bands before. There's nothing I can do with Verizon.
Well, let's start with some background information. And we talked about this before with Comcast versus Netflix, because Netflix, at its peak time, is like 30 to 40% of internet bandwidth. And so there's this whole thing about the big monopoly ISPs like Comcast and Verizon throttling Netflix because, they compete with Netflix. They have their own online video services and their cable providers and things like that. And so what Netflix started doing was when they noticed congestion on a particular connection, they did a traffic analysis. And they're like, okay, let's look at your ISP. Okay, whose ISP is that? Okay, that's with Verizon. What about all these other people who are experiencing congestion? Are they with Verizon? Oh, look, they are. And so they put up a notice advising people that Verizon was responsible for the congestion. And so Verizon complained about that, saying that they can't possibly know that it's Verizon's network when, yeah, they can. So Verizon desperately tried to do some damage control, and they have this graph where they accidentally, at least to those of us who understand how the internet works, showed that, yes, they themselves are to blame. And what they're trying to say is, oh, look, the congestion is not on our network, it's before it comes to us. But the way the internet works is that I have an ISP, in my case it's Charter. You guys have an ISP and you're using that to connect to Skype so that we can have this conversation. But if we're using different ISPs, then how does the traffic get between us? Well, there are other companies called transit providers, and in a minute we'll talk about one called Level 3. And so the ISPs connect to the transit providers, and the transit providers move the traffic around between themselves until they can get to where they have a connection to your ISP, and then the connection goes from there and into your computer. So in order to get from the ISP to the transit provider, they have to go through a border gateway, which is basically a piece of hardware called a border gateway router. And it has the network cables connected into it so that it can actually physically connect. So Verizon has a border router and Level 3 has a border router, and they connect them together. So they have this graph here dispelling the congestion myth. And so I'm going to try to describe it, but it's audio, so you might want to look at it yourself while I'm going over this. The link's in the show notes, but it says, like, other ISPs and content providers, average peak utilization is 44%, and that goes into their Los Angeles border router. And then Verizon's traffic going to Netflix transit providers is 34% peak utilization, but Netflix transit providers going to Verizon is 100% at peak utilization, and that's where the congestion is. And then once you get into Verizon's network, it's 56%, 46%, and so on. Well, I have no doubts at all that their numbers are correct. But the problem is, to anyone who knows how this works, is when you're looking at the connection between Verizon and Netflix across their transit providers, that's the same connection. So why would it be peak one way and not peak the other way? It's either congested or it isn't. If it's congested, traffic can't flow in either direction. So what's going on here?
Lying?
Pretty much. Level 3 responded on their blog called Verizon's Accidental Mea Culpa with a pretty good explanation about what's going on. And this is Mark Taylor, posting this, and he says, quote, that bar, and he's talking about the red bar that says 100%, actually represents a very large global network, and it should be shown in green since, as we will discuss in a moment, our network has plenty of available capacity as well. The utilization of all those thousands of links across the level 3 network is much the same as Verizon's depiction of their own network. We engineer it that way. We have to maintain adequate headroom because that's what we sell to customers. They buy high-quality, uncongested bandwidth, and in fact, Verizon admits as much because they conveniently show one direction across our network at a peak utilization of 34%. I can confirm again that all of those thousands of links on the level 3 network are managed carefully so the peak utilizations look very similar to those Verizon show for their own network in both directions. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, he explains that the problem isn't like the arrow makes it look like it's over on level 3's network. The problem is that actual connection in Los Angeles. And what he says that level 3 connects with Verizon in 10 cities, 3 in Europe and 7 in the United States. The aggregate utilization of these interconnections in Europe was 18%, a region where Verizon does not sell broadband to its customers. But in the United States, where Verizon does sell broadband and sees online video providers as competitors to its business, was up at about 100% and pretty much at the peak. And it was 100% utilization in the direction of the flow from level 3 to the Verizon network. So why is that happening? So he uses Los Angeles, which is the one Verizon used in their diagram. There's a building somewhere. And you have these routers, which are like these really, really huge, really heavy computers. And there's one that Verizon owns and one that level 3 owns. And each router has 4 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. And there are cables going between each of them, connecting them together. And the router uses something called load balancing to actually make it look like one big 40 gigabit connection. And so what he shows in his diagram is you have the level 3 traffic going to level 3's border router, and then you have the 4 connections to Verizon's border router that are at 100% utilization, and then he shows 4 other ports that are on the level 3 side that aren't connected up to Verizon's network. And so what he said was, quote, so in fact, we could fix this congestion in about 5 minutes simply by connecting up more 10 gigabit ports on those routers. Simple. Something we've been asking Verizon to do for many, many months, and something other providers regularly do in similar circumstances. But Verizon has refused. So Verizon, not level 3 or Netflix, causes the congestion. Why is that? Now this is where this really gets good. Maybe they can't afford a new port card because they've run out. Even though these cards are very cheap, just a few $1,000s for each 10 gigabit card, which could support 5,000 streams or more. If that's the case, we'll buy one for them. Maybe they can't afford that small piece of cable between our 2 ports. If that's the case, we'll provide it. Heck, we'll even install it. So I think he's just having fun at this point. But he's saying that the congestion only takes place between Verizon and the network providers chosen by Netflix. Why is that? Could it be that Verizon does not want its customers to actually use the higher speed services it sells to them? Could it be that Verizon wants to extract a pound of flesh from its competitors using the monopoly it has over the only connection to its end users to raise its competitors' costs? So, I mean, he makes a pretty good case saying that it's not level 3's fault and it's Verizon doing this. So then Verizon comes out with their response, and I just want to make one thing clear. I don't have a dog in this fight. I've never done business with either Verizon or Level 3. I have no opinion on them, but just the facts here go way against Verizon. So this is Verizon's blog entry titled Level 3 Selective Amnesia on Peering, where they say, quote, Level 3 decided to call attention to their congested links into Verizon's network. No, Verizon called attention to it in their graphic. They're the one that started this. So they go on, quote, Level 3 insists on only using its existing settlement-free peering links, even though, as Level 3 surprisingly admits in their blog, these links are experiencing significant congestion. Now that's an old tactic. Okay, they say they admitted that they're only using these links, but that was central to Level 3's argument because Level 3 wants to use more links, and Verizon is the one that won't let them. And they don't even mention that here in this blog.
Of course they didn't.
They don't even try to say that, no, we want to hook it up. They didn't. Nope, they don't even mention that part of it. So they're trying to portray like Level 3 was acknowledging Verizon's point. And they say, quote, rather than buy the capacity they need, Level 3 insists that Verizon should add capacity to the existing peering link for additional downstream traffic, even though the traffic is already wildly out of balance. Well, but again, what they showed was that Verizon was the one making the congestion by not opening up more ports. Level 3 has plenty of capacity. The bottleneck is that link between Level 3 and Verizon. So they go on to talk about this fight that Level 3 had a while back with Cogent, which is another transit provider. And a lot of people have actually fallen for this, a lot of really smart people, because it does seem to be like they're having a good point if you don't actually understand what's going on. But what was going on was that Level 3 and Cogent had a peering agreement, which is an agreement between two transit providers. So Level 3 is a transit provider. They have a whole bunch of ISPs that connect to them. Cogent is a transit provider. They have a whole bunch of ISPs connect to them. And Netflix actually connects its services directly to Cogent. And what they say is, I'm sending traffic to you, you're sending traffic to me, and that pretty much all balances out. So as long as there's this balance there, and it's all pretty much equal, why don't we just say, we'll keep the traffic going back and forth for free, without charging for each other. And their problem was that Cogent was sending more traffic to Level 3 than Level 3 was sending to Cogent. And so they said, well, that goes against our agreement. So since you're sending more traffic to us and we're incurring a greater expense than you are, then you need to pay us. And that is the typical peering agreement between two transit providers. So what Verizon is doing is pointing to that and basically calling them hypocrites because, they want Verizon to do this, even though, Verizon's complaining about the traffic being way out of balance, that Level 3 is sending Verizon a lot more traffic than Verizon is sending to Level 3. But the thing is, it's a completely different arrangement. Verizon is not a transit provider. It's a monopoly provider to end users. Verizon has used that monopoly power to sell connections to the users, promising that they'll be able to access content from any website. And this whole idea of the traffic ratios and they're sending us more traffic so they need to pay us. Well, geez, of course Verizon users are going to download more than they upload, because when you get a plan, it's like 1 megabit download, 384K upload, or 50 megs download and 1 meg upload. They're not letting users upload anywhere near as much as they download, and then they complain to Level 3 that they're sending more traffic than they're receiving. Well, what do they expect?
That's basic math.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's just the way the internet works. When you go to a web page, your request saying, please send me this web page is really tiny. The website that you get back, there's this HTML file, and then there's all the images that are in there, and if there's any flash or anything like that, what you're getting is a lot more than what you're sending, and that's just how the internet works. But this is the thing. Verizon's whining about all this traffic Level 3 is sending into their network, but all of that traffic is data that Verizon's customers requested. It's not Level 3 saying, oh, we want to use your network for our own purposes. No. And all Verizon is doing is demonstrating that since they're a monopoly, they don't have to service the customer or worry about getting the customer's money.
Pretty much.
Damn.
No, I mean, it would be like letting people in your business order as much as they can, shipped via UPS, but only occasionally send packages to UPS, and then complaining to UPS that they're dropping off more than they're picking up and they need to pay you. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
I'd say. That is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they say things on their blog, unfortunately, Level 3 is the one trying to get a free ride on someone else's network and failing to keep the interest of their customers paramount. And I'm kind of reminded of, did you guys see the Blues Brothers?
No, believe it or not.
I have.
There's this one scene where Joliet Jake is confronting Carrie Fisher's character, who they never really tell us about, but apparently he left her at the altar and she's got a gun on him and he's going, I ran out of gas. I had a flat tire. I didn't have enough money for cab fare. My tux didn't come back from the cleaners. An old friend came from out of town. Someone stole my car. There was an earthquake, a terrible flood, locusts. It wasn't my fault. Well, that's what I see Verizon doing here.
That sounds about right. The thing is, even if you don't get internet jargon and like how the internet actually works, like in pure technical details, just by what you explained, it's obvious that Verizon is in the wrong here.
Hopefully, I think I've done a good job of explaining it. I mean, it's just the fact that when you get internet access, you get that nice big download pipe. I mean, they deliberately set up a situation where users will download more than they upload, in addition to, just being how the internet works. And then they're complaining to the transit provider that the traffic ratios are out of whack and it needs extra money from them just so they can open up a few more ports. No, Verizon is deliberately clogging the connection to the transit provider and then trying to blame the transit provider and get some unearned money out of the deal. I don't know if it's indicative of the market power Verizon thinks they wield, or if it's just incredible hubris. Either way, it's enough to make Verizon this week's biggest Bogon emitter. Hackers, terrorists, the NSA. But I repeat myself. Your online security is under attack, and the weakest point is your password. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass plugs into your browser and allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords anywhere on the web, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers and all your computers, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, membership info, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications and even mobile devices, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now. Bogosity.tv and all of its services are hosted at GoDaddy. I've been very satisfied with GoDaddy's services and their wonderful 24/7 customer support for over 10 years now. So I'm happy to be able to give you this special offer. Just sign up for any new domain, web hosting, email, or other service and get 35% off with the code WOWNOBOGON. That's WOWNOBOGON. Because there's nothing bogus about these savings on quality internet hosting. Just go to GoDaddy.com and use the code WOWNOBOGON. Well, grab the torches and plastic sporks. It's time for this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. So as I've said before on my YouTube channel, I'm a subscriber to Steve Shives, who does all these excellent videos on atheism and religion. In particular, he has this wonderful series called An Atheist Reads. A couple of days ago, he just finished up the part of that series covering Ray Comfort's books, so highly recommended. The only time I've criticized him is when he made that video, 5 Stupid Things About Libertarianism, and he just got everything wrong from what libertarian is to lots of historical facts he got wrong and arguments that just didn't make any sense, and that's the only time I've criticized him. Until now. Here's what he had to say in a recent edition of You Had to Ask, where he answers questions from viewers.
My first question comes to me from Michael, who says, although you disagree with people's faiths and think they're stupid, like myself and I'd assume a lot of us, do you at all respect their opinions and choices in faith? I think it's more accurate to say that I respect their rights to their opinions, not necessarily that I respect their opinions. And I know I'm being a bit more particular with my language there than I often am, but in this case I think it's a distinction that is important to me, that's worth making. I respect the right of anybody to hold any opinion that they hold, but I don't necessarily respect the opinion.
Well, that sounds great, right?
It sounds pretty reasonable and all things good.
Yeah, and he's right. Not all opinions are deserving of respect, but everyone should have the right to express them. And if someone has a stupid opinion, we have precisely the same right to say how stupid we think that opinion is. So, no disagreement from me.
No, that's spot on.
Mm-hmm.
Real Cool Cowboy. Hey, Steve. There seems to be a strain of anti-feminism in the atheist community. People like The Amazing Atheist and Thunderfoot come to mind. What are your thoughts on that trend, and do you think there's a reason for it? I'm troubled by it. I'm troubled by anti-feminism. I don't think anti-feminism makes any sense. I think I see feminism as a very positive, very progressive force for our society, so naturally I'm opposed to anything that is opposed to feminism. But it's not just the atheist community, but we as atheists notice it because that's the community that we're in, you know. But the atheist community itself is a community of great ideological and philosophical diversity. There are feminists, there are anti-feminists, there are people who do not give a shit about feminism either way. There are all kinds of political positions that atheists have. It's a very diverse community because atheism is just a single position on a single thing. And there's nothing you can really do about that, and there's nothing that I would really want to do about that.
All right, that sounds reasonable. I'll go along with that. But then he turns all of that around later in his video with the answer to this question.
Bum shorts for life. Hey Steve, recently I found myself in the middle of a debate on the subject of prostitution and whether or not it is a victimless crime. The person in which I was discussing this with claimed that it is because as adults it's ultimately up to the individual to consent to such an activity, for which I countered that it is not, for the fact that the majority of prostitutes were brought in as kidnapped minors in sex slave rings, among other factors such as violence and forced drug addiction. Basically, I find it hard to consider their consent as adults legitimate when I know that it stems from years of complete distortion to their minds at the hands of others. And it's not like it's hard to obtain this information. I found the statistics at FBI.gov, but apparently that's not a viable enough source. What are your thoughts on all of this? I agree with you, and I actually think that the prostitution issue is a great example of why I think that libertarian ideals fail when subjected to real-world tests.
Thing is, we don't have to guess. We know what's happened in places that have legalized prostitution, and these problems just do not happen. You only get illegal trafficking with prohibition. And the whole time prostitution has been legal in Nevada, there hasn't been a single case of a sex worker getting HIV. They aren't beat up by pimps or anything. They're very much in charge and control of what's going on. Because when it's legal, when it's a free market activity, both sides have to agree with it. If either side doesn't want to or decides to back out, the transaction doesn't take place.
Yeah, and there's the very obvious, a prostitute can't call the cops if a pimp beats the crap out of her, or if somebody screws her out of money, or if somebody tries to rape her.
Right.
She, without facing going to jail herself. It's a very basic black market scenario. When you can't work in the open environment of a typical free market, you end up in a situation of coercion because that becomes the most effective means of getting things done.
Well, I was going to cover this in News of the Bogus, but since he said this, I thought it'd be better to cover it here. And this is the results of a paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research, which looked at Rhode Island. Because what happened was there was a change to a law made way back in 1980, and they had decided that the law was too vague and ended up violating the First Amendment, so they revised it, but in revising it, they inadvertently removed a clause that said that prostitution was a crime. No one realized the error until a 2003 court case. But from that point until the law was fixed in 2009, prostitution was legal in Rhode Island.
And they were all the happier.
Well, see, this is the kind of thing economists love, because you can do a before-after study. It's the same location, the same culture and everything. And so during this period of time, the number of rapes in Rhode Island decreased 31%, and the rate of gonorrhea among women went down 39%. They showed quantitative evidence that legalizing prostitution decreases violence against women dramatically.
Now, of course, you would think that they would look at something like this and think, oh, gee, that's a good idea, let's follow suit. But no, that's never how it works.
No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's like you said, when it's legal, if a client is giving a prostitute trouble, she can call the cops. If you have legal prostitution, no one has to kidnap women to do it because they come forth voluntarily and offer the services in a free market. They can require that the client use condoms or even submit to a medical exam. There are 8 counties in Nevada where it's been legal for decades, and the prostitutes themselves have to get checked regularly. In Germany, prostitution is legal, and even though they're not required by law to have regular health checks, they do anyway, and it isn't a problem. And human trafficking in Germany is way down.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those things that even, in a libertarian scenario of, if somebody's going to engage in providing prostitution, regular health checks is something that I think you would want, that most reputable places would do anyway voluntarily.
Right. Because then they would get the best sex workers, because they'd say, hey, come work for us and we'll do this. And then the other ones are like, oh no, we're going to lose good employees, so we'll have to do it too.
That and better paying customers.
Well, not only that, but it's also smart in the case of the prostitute anyway, because obviously, I mean, yeah, in the sense it is still a good or a service, but the service is your own body, so they feel the effect more directly if they don't properly have their stuff sorted out. So it's an even more direct risk to not take care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's just no evidence that human trafficking gets any worse with legalized prostitution. In fact, pretty much all the human trafficking originates in countries where prostitution is illegal, even though the destination can be somewhere where it's legal. But there's no evidence whatsoever that making prostitution illegal reduces human trafficking. And there's all sorts of evidence showing that it results in increased violence toward women, both by Johns and pimps.
Yeah. It's a typical black market scenario. In a black market, you have more violence, whether it's with prostitution, drugs, or back in the 30s, liquor.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and I don't know why people can't seem to put the connection together, but it's so obvious that anyone should be able to detect it.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they don't because they legitimately can't see it, or they don't because it goes against their pet beliefs, which I'm assuming it's more than likely the latter.
Yeah.
But the fact is, most black markets function the same, whether it's drugs, prostitution, liquor, guns. You're going to get more of the same scenarios, and when you take it out of the black market, you will always notice that there is a huge difference in how business is handled, and the results in terms of violent crime are just constant.
And Steve Shives is someone who has demonstrated that he knows how to reason, he knows how to do research. I mean, all you really have to do is look this up, and I mean, you can get there in 5 minutes. But I guess he's just going with the talking points, and so he doesn't have to think.
Yeah, pet beliefs.
Yeah. Well, going back to the study, they also found that more women engaged in prostitution, and as a result, prices fell, and it's really hard to imagine involuntary slave labor competing with that. They also said that in Rhode Island, the vice squads were still going after prostitutes as before. They just couldn't do anything about legal prostitution, so what they were looking for was human trafficking. They seized ledgers, calendars, cell phones, all sorts of things, but they could never connect any prostitution during this period to organized crime, and very few, if any, of the arrests made during this time led to convictions on trafficking charges.
Of course not.
It's even worse. The fact that they're still targeting a legal business.
Well, to be fair, that's standard for the market anyway in this day and age.
Yeah, true.
It just so happens that this particular market used to be a crime.
Yeah. Yeah, ride sharing, now prostitution, whatever. If it's legal, we don't care. But I mean, the thing is, Steve is just wrong. He's blindly repeating talking points without bothering to research them, exactly what he accuses religious apologists of doing.
The sad part is, this is becoming more common with people who should know better. And it really does say a lot when people who are more than capable of seeing through this kind of nonsense when, say, creationists or the religious right throw these kind of talking points and non-arguments out, they are quickly, easily enough able to see right through them and give proper and concise counter-arguments. But when it comes to their own nonsense, then that's totally different. It's a double standard, is what it comes down to. Whether they want to admit it or not, it is a double standard.
Should one adult have the right to make a financial agreement with another adult to have sex, where they both know what's going on, they both consent, they both agree? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. My own personal feelings about it are irrelevant. If that's all that's going on, then that should be fine. But that's not all that's going on.
Actually, the evidence shows, yeah, it is, or at least whatever else is going on isn't any worse than it is under prohibition, and is more likely going to be much better with legalized prostitution.
You have to consider things in their context, and in context, prostitution is a field that is ripe with corruption and abuse.
Because it's illegal. Again, as we've seen, make it legal, and these problems pretty much go away.
And it also goes back to the same old, if you can't get help because you have to worry about being locked in a cage yourself, yeah, of course there's going to be more violence.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
And if it were legalized, it would have to be legalized in such a way that it was regulated incredibly tightly, incredibly heavily, to take every precaution to eliminate that sort of exploitation and abuse.
Well, that's funny, because we've had legal prostitution, and they perfectly regulated themselves without any kind of abuse.
Yeah.
So what say you, smart guy?
Well, and again, it's guilty until proven innocent. It's like, okay, we're going to legalize what you do, but we still have to put down the screws on you to make sure you don't do anything wrong. I mean, give me a break. And then he goes full on crazy with this question.
Marv Roberts, you are such a hypocrite, Steve. All a person has to do is mention they support men's rights, and you turn into one of the most angry, vile, and disgusting people on YouTube. When I hear someone advocate for men's rights in our society, it sounds just as absurd to me as if someone were to advocate for Christian rights or for white rights. You cannot be a member of a privileged class and continue to insist that you deserve rights.
What? Sorry, Steve. Everyone has rights. Even with this so-called privilege you want to pretend exists, but which no economist has found any evidence for.
Damn it, Shane. That's just showing your white male privilege.
Yeah. Yeah, you can shut down every response that way, can't you?
I'm going to go on a little tangent here with these social justice warriors. I see this kind of crap all the time, and let me tell you something. That white privilege stuff is full of crap. You want to talk white male privilege? I was actually a victim of what I call white guilt. When I was in school, I was in 8th grade at the time, I had an art teacher whose name I won't list for, quite frankly, out of shame. She honestly believed that because she was white and white people oppressed black people in history, that she felt that she and all other white people should pay a consequence for what happened, or at the very least, should be overridden with guilt, and she decided to give the African American students better treatment because of this. Where, say, for example, she had assigned seating, and so they ignored that and sat with their friends anyway. But if the white kids sat with their friends, you had to go back to your seat, to your assigned seat. And then when somebody pointed out, well, what about them? She said, well, that's different. Blatantly. Now, sure, that's a different kind of social justice warrior, but it's more or less a lot of the same arguments. You see, these things tend to overlap each other when it comes to their arguments that they make. It's the same thing as just insert your victim here. And here's the thing. You're either special or you're equal. You don't get to be both. And whether or not it's white guilt, or whether or not it's male guilt, or whether or not it's white privilege, or male privilege, or cis privilege, or whatever the hell you want to make up some random terms that nobody's ever used until you decided one day, oh, that's what I'm going to use, and everybody has to know it or else they're a bigoted jerk. Well, you get the option of either being special or equal. You don't get to be both. That's just all it comes down to. Stop acting like we have a certain class of people who are better than the rest of us. You want to talk about privilege? How about the political class? That's a group that I would call privileged.
Oh, definitely.
You don't talk about them very much, do you? In fact, you want this privileged class to rain down on the rest of us to somehow get rid of our privilege that doesn't exist and hasn't existed since about maybe the 60s.
Probably into the 70s or 80s before you really get a lot of the major kinds of sexism out of pretty much everyday society.
And that's not to say that misogyny or racism doesn't exist. It does. But to act like it's still the norm of the majority, and to act like because I was somehow lucky enough to be born a white man, that somehow embodies me with, I don't know, social power or some nonsense. It's stupid, and you people need to get over it. You need to get over it. You know, like I said, it's not like racism and misogyny don't exist, but you people aren't going after actual racism and misogyny. You're going after stupid crap that is nothing. You're going after nothing. You want to know when I'll take feminists seriously? When they start going after the Middle East.
Yeah.
For how they treat women.
Oh, but you bring that up and you're a horrible person.
Who hates Muslims.
Yeah.
You need to knock it off. And I'm sure there's going to be some comment by some social justice lunatic who's like, oh, that Dave Turcotte, he's a racist, misogynist, anti-Islamic, he's every name in the book that we could come up with, and he probably hates everyone. He probably even hates elves.
White power, Dave.
Yeah.
White power.
There's probably also going to be people saying, well, those are just 3 white guys, so what do they know about anything?
Well, I'm a white dude with red hair, and if I recall correctly, there has always been a bias towards gingers. Non-ginger privilege. I am putting that card down.
I wish I was ginger.
But you are still a member of a class, men, who are the most privileged people in the world. So for a member of that group to say, well, what about men's rights? It's absurd. It's stupid.
Oh, really? It's absurd to want at least something resembling equality in divorce and child custody courts. It's absurd to want rape against men to be considered just as bad and just as illegal as rape against women. Even though the FBI never even recognized that men could be raped until 2011, and they still don't recognize forced envelopment as rape. It's absurd to want men not to be arrested for indecent exposure when they're naked in the privacy of their own home and seen by a woman who's trespassing on his property. I mean, come on.
You want to know what's absurd? What's absurd is creating a special class while saying anybody who disagrees is a special class. That's absurd. And that's exactly what they're doing.
I mean, why doesn't he go up to those Duke lacrosse players and say that to their faces?
You know what? He probably would. These people... they don't care about things like evidence. They care about emotions. They care about simple use of male privilege as an argument. They love their little, their slogans and their sayings and all of these stupid things that they constantly love to rant and rave about, despite the fact that they have no evidence to support them.
Mm-hmm.
They're just as crazy and wacky as the creationists that they love to crap on.
Yeah, and when a woman accuses a man of rape, they don't want the male defendant to have the right to confront his accuser, because that's victim blaming. That's putting the victim on trial.
And the worst part is, these social justice people, they don't even respect women.
No.
They're just as misogynistic as the people that they claim are misogynists.
Oh, more so. Much, much more so.
When that Miss Nevada or whatever beauty pageant woman was suggested that women should consider learning martial arts or some kind of means of self-defense.
Good advice.
They accused her of victim blaming. and promoting rape culture. But yet when Joe Biden, the vice president that they love to keep hidden behind the closet, when Joe Biden comes out and says, oh, well, women ought to pee their pants to gross the rapist out, that's sound advice, apparently. So you would rather see women literally urinate themselves than to defend themselves.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about in a court of law where the defendant is supposed to have the presumption of innocence. If we presume innocence, then we presume that the accuser is not a victim until we get a conviction. If you accuse someone of a crime, especially one as heinous as rape, you better be able to back it up. And this whole thing about, it's putting the victim on trial, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that. If you can't confront your accuser, then our whole justice system crumbles.
The fact is, they don't want the chance that they could be wrong to be revealed.
Yeah.
They don't want that. And here, let me tell you something about falsely accusing someone of rape. It doesn't matter if they end up innocent or not. They still get the stigma of being a rapist.
Oh, yeah.
They still get that stigma. When you accuse someone of rape, you essentially ruin their life forever, even if they aren't guilty.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, I don't give a crap what anybody says about me. To me, that is just as vile, just as awful, and just as perverted as any rapist.
I like the idea that if you falsely accuse someone of a crime, and it can be proved that you lied about it and make it up and not mistaken identity or something like that, if it can be proved that you deliberately falsely accused someone of the crime, you serve the sentence they would have gotten if they had been convicted. I like that idea.
Yeah, and the problem is, even with an idea like that imposed, you still have the problem of the person who was falsely accused getting the stigma. Look at the Duke lacrosse players. Even though they were found innocent, people still think Duke lacrosse players and think rape.
Yep. And they're having trouble getting jobs. They're having trouble I'm sure they don't feel very privileged since that happened.
And you want to talk about male privilege? How about African American males who go to jail more often than most women, who get longer jail sentences, who are more likely to be put on death row
for the same crimes?
Yeah. How about asking them if they're privileged for being male?
Or what about the fact that female business owners make 17% more than male business owners, all other things being equal?
But men make more than women, Shane. Don't you know that?
Yeah, we trounced that I don't know how many podcasts ago.
Yeah, but that doesn't count.
Once you account for all of the other factors, there's just hardly any room left for any discrimination. If there is any of that's a result of discrimination, it's so small that it doesn't even show up amid the statistical noise.
And I don't care if you what you have to say about this. You know why? Because you're stupid. It's just what it comes down to. You're morons.
Yeah, if you're dumb enough to say that, we don't value your opinion.
Yeah, I don't value your opinion. You know why? Because you don't really care about equality for women. You don't care about any of that. You know what you care about? You're in the business of victimhood. That's what you are. And you know what? Business is good. The reason why these people are against women learning how to defend themselves is because victimhood is a business. It is. It's an absolute business. And if you can't scare people, and if you can't have a victim to leech upon to make yourself look better, then what else have you got? You got nothing. And nobody would take you seriously. I don't take you seriously, but I guess it's not my opinion that really matters.
Nope, you're a cis white male.
It completely ignores people who have legitimate issues and legitimate problems that need to be addressed.
Wow. So all the men who are raped in this country, and as we've covered on the podcast before, men are raped in this country almost as often as women, even if you don't count prison rapes, yet most of them find no justice for it. That's not a legitimate problem. I mean, I would think that the problems that women had in the 70s and 80s getting their claims of rape taken seriously in the courts, I would think that would be recent enough in today's memory that we can easily see the parallel. I mean, the only reason to think that these complaints are not legitimate problems is solely because the victim is a man. That's what he just said.
Shane, they were just asking for it.
Yeah. Well, he was wearing some tight jeans and that denim jacket.
Yeah, and he was wearing that polo cologne. But I mean, is it really too much to ask for social justice warriors to be, I don't know, warriors for social justice? Or is it justice for me and not for thee?
Well, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Because in the minds of these people, they care about their own or their own little pet beliefs. And they don't care about actual people's problems. They just want to make people feel guilty and scam people into thinking a lot of crap.
It's a really ugly, disgusting group of people. And that's why I take such open delight and glee in mocking them and ridiculing them and insulting them and abusing them, because I feel that that's what they deserve.
Taking glee in insulting people and calling them disgusting just because of their membership in a group, what do we call that now?
We call that bigoted.
I would think.
We call that, you're a piece of crap who just earlier said you respect the right of people's opinions.
I know.
And then you say you take glee in their suffering. Shane, I'm going to warn you, get the censor button ready.
Okay.
You in the neck, you piece of shit.
Yeah, but I mean, he goes all about how he disrespects the opinion and not the person. But, I mean, that's exactly what he said he doesn't do, and here he is doing it.
This guy is, just f*** off. Just f*** off.
I know I ruffled some feathers among my viewers a couple of months ago when I was talking about Elliot Rodgers, and I said that I suggested that maybe men's rights activists could make the world a better place by killing themselves. Maybe it's too harsh to say that men's rights activists should kill themselves. I mean, suicide is a tragic thing. So maybe instead I could hope that they drive without seatbelts. Or if they happen to live in a zone where there's a flood warning or a hurricane warning, just stay where you are. You know, they could befall some natural disaster could kind of take them out of the equation and improve the world for the rest of us. You know, an earthquake, a volcano.
Wow. Just wow. I mean, first of all, there is no evidence that Elliot Rodgers was an MRA. And second, even if he were, you do not get to demonize an entire group of people from the actions of one. What was that we called it again?
This guy makes my blood boil.
And by the way, all this also goes for those MRAs who make the same arguments about feminists. I mean, the point is, no matter which side you're on, people should be judged as individuals, not as their membership in some group or class that's considered to be oppressed or privileged. Don't be a feminist. Don't be an MRA. Be an individualist. If your evaluation of whether someone has a certain right or can speak out on an issue or is making a correct argument has anything at all to do with sex or gender either way, you're doing it wrong. So once again, we have someone doing everything he complains about other people doing, and apparently doesn't have any shame about it at all. Well, unlike Steve, we're not going to hope he's hit by an earthquake or tell him not to wear a seatbelt. We'll just say that there couldn't possibly be anyone more deserving than Steve Shives for this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Well, that wraps up this Are There Any Women Here Today edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free but not free to produce, so please donate via PayPal or Bitcoin at the top of the bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Jonathan Loesche and Dave Turcotte for joining me.
Thanks to be back.
I hope I didn't get you canceled.
It'll probably take more than that. Until next time, here's a quote from Angela Epstein. Feminism has betrayed its roots and deteriorated into spurious artificial engineering. Rather than campaigning to help women, feminists today are more likely to be picking fights on Twitter or dressing up petty grievances as proof of rampant sexism. If I ever was a feminist, I can't be now. So ashamed and depressed am I by a once laudable movement. I think any sensible woman will join me in feeling saddened by how irrelevant and niche modern feminism has become. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License.
Bogosity.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.
You know, I'm actually amazed you managed to say that real quick every time.
I don't always get it the first time. You can ask some of the others. Sometimes it takes me like 3 or 4 times to get through it.
You would think after a while you would just record one and then just kind of slap it on at the end, but
it just doesn't sound the same. I mean, there's just difference in like voice quality, tonal quality, and stuff like that. It just sounds more natural to do it each time.
yeah. You know, it's funny. I actually just thought of something when we were talking about that whole male privilege nonsense, and I'm surprised I didn't even say it then. Remember last week I covered Join Our Boys, and I said that Duchenne muscular dystrophy is primarily a boys-only disease, and yet you don't hear anything about it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. It's another sign of, is there really male privilege?